You were not born this way, hyper-aware, overgiving, endlessly accommodating. You were shaped, you were trained. You were molded by moments when being good felt safer than being real. Because long before you were called an empath, you were a child who learned one quiet rule: your needs come second. And that rule didn't come from cruelty alone. Sometimes it came from chaos, sometimes from emotional absence, sometimes from love that was inconsistent, overwhelming, or conditional. You learned early that expressing anger caused distance, that wanting too much created tension, that being selfish, even in healthy ways, risked losing connection, so you adapted. You became attentive. You became helpful. You became emotionally fluent far beyond your years. You did not wake up one day and decide to feel everything. You did not choose to be attuned, alert, emotionally available at all times. This way of being was learned long before you had language for it. It began in moments when connection felt uncertain, when love felt conditional, when safety depended on reading the room correctly. Your sensitivity was not a personality feature that randomly emerged. It was a response to an environment that required you to pay attention in order to belong. As a child, you noticed things others missed. A change in tone, a silence that carried weight, a tension that meant something was about to shift. You learned that staying emotionally aware helped you avoid conflict, helped you keep adults calm, helped you remain included. So you sharpened that skill. You became perceptive, intuitive, emotionally intelligent far beyond your years. Not because it was praised at first, but because it worked. This is how empathy becomes a survival strategy. When direct expression of needs feels unsafe or unwelcome, attention turns outward. The child learns to ask, not what do I feel, but what do they need from me right now? Over time, this outward focus becomes automatic. It feels natural. It feels like kindness. But underneath it lives a nervous system that learned early that self-expression carried risk. You were likely told you were mature, easy understanding. Those words felt like approval, but they were also instructions. They reinforced the idea that being low maintenance was desirable, that having fewer needs made you lovable. And so you complied. You learned to minimize yourself before anyone else had to ask. You learned to anticipate expectations rather than assert preferences. You learned that harmony was maintained by your flexibility. Empathy formed in this way is not rooted in abundance. It is rooted in vigilance. It is the body staying alert, scanning constantly, ready to respond. This kind of empathy is exhausting, not because caring is heavy, but because fear is. Fear of disconnection, fear of being too much, fear of being left. As an adult, this survival-based empathy often goes unquestioned. It becomes part of your identity. You tell yourself, this is just who I am. You may even take pride in it. After all, being empathetic is valued. It makes you a good friend, a good partner, a good listener. But beneath that identity lies a pattern that was never chosen consciously. And what was adaptive in childhood can become limiting in adulthood. You may notice that you struggle to know what you want until someone else wants something different. You may feel uncomfortable when attention is focused on you. You may feel responsible for other people's moods, believing it's your job to smooth, soothe, stabilize. When conflict arises, your instinct may be to resolve it quickly, even at the cost of your own truth. These are not personality quirks. They are echoes of an earlier time. The survival empath often confuses intensity with closeness. Emotional labor becomes a substitute for intimacy. You feel close to people you help, fix, or emotionally support, even if they don't truly see you. And because this pattern once kept you safe, it feels strangely familiar, even comforting, despite the exhaustion it creates. Understanding empathy as a survival skill changes the way you relate to yourself. It removes shame. It explains why resting feels difficult, why saying no feels dangerous, why choosing yourself triggers guilt. These reactions are not signs that you are selfish or uncaring. They are signs that your nervous system still associates self-prioritization with threat. The child who learned to be empathetic did not do so out of generosity alone. They did it because they needed connection, and this was the most reliable way they knew to secure it. That child deserves compassion, not judgment. They did the best they could with what they had. But the adult you are now has more options. Recognizing empathy as survival opens the door to choice. It allows you to ask whether your caring is coming from presence or from pressure, from desire or from fear, from fullness or from habit. This awareness is not about becoming less empathetic. It is about reclaiming agency. When empathy shifts from survival to choice, it feels different in the body. It is calmer, slower, less urgent. You are able to stay connected without losing yourself. You can notice someone else's pain without feeling compelled to carry it. You can care without disappearing. This does not happen by force. It happens through understanding, through gently acknowledging that what you once called your nature was, in part, your adaptation. And adaptations can be honored without being obeyed forever. The moment you see this clearly, something loosens. You stop blaming yourself for your exhaustion. You stop trying to fix your sensitivity. You begin to recognize that the goal was never to feel less, but to feel safely. And safety begins when empathy is no longer the price you pay for belonging. When a child is never allowed to be selfish, their needs do not disappear. They simply go underground. They learn early that wanting too much creates tension, that asking directly brings discomfort, that prioritizing themselves risks withdrawal or disapproval. So the need remains, but the expression is silenced. What looks like compliance on the surface is often suppression underneath, and suppression always demands payment later. As a child, you may have learned to read the emotional temperature of the room before checking in with yourself. You may have sensed that there wasn't enough space for your frustration, your sadness, your anger, your hunger for attention. Maybe others had bigger emotions, louder needs, more urgent cries. Maybe you were subtly praised for not adding to the load. Over time, be easy became your role. Being low maintenance became your protection. But the nervous system does not confuse silence with absence. Every unexpressed need is still registered. Every swallowed desire still leaves an imprint. The body keeps track of what the mind learns to dismiss. And when those needs are consistently ignored, the body adapts by tightening, bracing, staying alert. This adaptation works for a while. It allows the child to function, to belong, to stay connected. But it is not sustainable. In adulthood, this suppressed selfishness often shows up as chronic exhaustion. Not the kind of tiredness that rest alone fixes, but a deeper depletion. You may sleep and still wake up heavy. You may take breaks and still feel drained. This is because the exhaustion is not physical alone. It is emotional. It is the cost of constantly overriding your own signals to remain acceptable. Guilt becomes a constant companion. Guilt for resting. Guilt for saying no. Guilt for wanting space. Even guilt for feeling resentful, as if resentment were a moral failure rather than a message. But resentment is rarely about lack of gratitude. It is about lack of reciprocity. It arises when giving is expected rather than chosen, when generosity becomes compulsory instead of voluntary. Burnout follows quietly. You may still show up, you may still perform care, you may still be reliable. But inside something feels flat, joy dulls, curiosity fades, empathy starts to feel heavy instead of nourishing. You may wonder why helping others no longer fills you the way it used to. The answer is not that you have changed for the worse. It is that you have been emptying yourself without permission to refill. Healthy selfishness was never about ignoring others. It was about acknowledging yourself. It was about learning that your needs mattered too, that your internal world was worth listening to, that wanting did not make you dangerous or unlovable. When this lesson is never learned, adulthood becomes an endless negotiation between duty and depletion. You may find yourself confused by your own reactions. You want closeness, yet you feel suffocated. You crave connection, yet you fantasize about disappearing. You love deeply, yet you feel unseen. These contradictions are not signs of inconsistency. They are the result of needs that were never given room to breathe. Suppressed selfishness often turns inward. Anger becomes self-criticism. Desire becomes shame. Fatigue becomes self-blame. You tell yourself you should be more grateful, more patient, more understanding. You hold yourself to impossible standards of emotional generosity, while denying yourself the same compassion you offer others. The body eventually intervenes. It may do so through anxiety, forcing you to slow down. Through depression, dimming your capacity to keep performing. Through physical symptoms that demand attention when words were never allowed. These are not betrayals, they are attempts at balance. The system trying to correct what was denied. Learning healthy selfishness later in life can feel disorienting. You may not know what you want at first. You may feel uncomfortable focusing on yourself. You may mistake self-attention for self-indulgence. But there is a profound difference between selfishness that harms and selfishness that heals. One takes without regard. The other restores what was withheld. As you begin to honor your needs, you may feel awkward, even clumsy. You may overcorrect at times, swinging between overgiving and withdrawal. This is part of the recalibration. A system that was trained to ignore itself needs time to learn a new language. Patience is essential here, not perfection. The burnout you experience is not evidence that you are weak. It is evidence that you have been strong for too long in the wrong way. Strength that requires self-erasure is not resilience. It is endurance without nourishment, and endurance always has a breaking point. When selfishness is reclaimed in its healthy form, something softens. The body relaxes its guard. The constant vigilance eases. You begin to feel your limits before crossing them. You begin to recognize fatigue as information rather than failure. You begin to allow yourself what you once denied, not as a rebellion but as a correction. Healing does not begin with effort. It begins with permission. Permission to stop performing, to stop proving, to stop earning your place in the world through sacrifice. For someone who learned early that love was conditional, this permission feels unnatural, even dangerous. The idea that you could simply exist, have needs, and still be worthy can trigger deep unease. But that unease is not a warning sign. It is the nervous system encountering a new possibility. For much of your life, love may have felt transactional. You gave care, understanding, patience, and in return you received connection, approval, or at least stability. This exchange was never spoken aloud, but it was felt. Over time, it shaped your identity. You became someone who anticipated, accommodated, and adjusted, someone who earned closeness by being useful. And because this pattern once kept you connected, stepping out of it can feel like stepping into isolation. Giving yourself permission means challenging the belief that you must be indispensable to be loved. It means allowing yourself to disappoint others without collapsing internally. This is not an act of defiance. It is an act of differentiation. It is the moment you recognize that your worth does not depend on how seamlessly you fit into other people's expectations. At first, permission shows up in small, almost invisible ways. You pause before saying yes. You notice a tightness in your body and take it seriously. You choose rest without justifying it. You allow someone else to handle their own discomfort. These moments may feel wrong at first, as if you are breaking an unspoken rule. And in a sense you are. You are breaking a rule that was written when you had no other options. Guilt will likely appear. It often does when permission is long overdue. Guilt says you are selfish, that you are abandoning others, that you are becoming someone you don't recognize. But guilt is not always a measure of morality. Often, it is a residue of conditioning, a signal that you are no longer complying with a role that once defined you. As you continue to give yourself permission, relationships begin to change. Some people adjust. They learn to meet you differently, to respect your limits, to engage with you more honestly. Others resist. They may question your changes, minimize your needs, or withdraw. This can hurt, especially if those relationships once felt central to your sense of belonging. But resistance often reveals where your self-sacrifice was being mistaken for connection. Permission also invites you into unfamiliar territory, your own desire. When you are no longer orienting primarily around others, you may realize you are unsure what you want. This is not a failure. It is a consequence of long-term self-neglect. Desire, like a muscle, weakens when unused. It returns slowly through curiosity rather than pressure. You may discover anger you were never allowed to feel, grief for the parts of you that had to grow up too fast, sadness for the care you offered so freely but rarely received. These emotions are not obstacles to healing. They are evidence that something real is being acknowledged. Feeling them does not make you bitter. It makes you honest. Permission transforms empathy itself. When you no longer give from fear, your care becomes clearer. You stop rescuing and start relating. You stop absorbing and start witnessing. You are able to be present without being overwhelmed, compassionate without being consumed. This kind of empathy does not deplete. It connects. As your internal permission strengthens, your external world begins to reorganize. You become less reactive to approval and disapproval. You trust your internal signals more than external demands. You feel less urgency to explain yourself. Your boundaries become quieter but firmer. You no longer negotiate your needs in moments of exhaustion. This process is not about becoming self-centered. It is about becoming self-connected. It is about allowing the part of you that was never given space to finally take up room. It is about recognizing that care given under compulsion is not love, and that love does not require the disappearance of the self. When you give yourself permission, you begin to experience a different quality of belonging, one that does not depend on performance, one that does not require constant vigilance, one that allows you to be imperfect, tired, uncertain, and still connected. Permission is not something you ask for. It is something you claim, gently and repeatedly, in the moments where you choose yourself without apology, where you listen to your body without argument, where you allow your needs to exist without justification, where you stop proving and start being.